Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to share and subscribe the channel. The knock. The night air lay heavy over Thomas Carter's woodland cabin, every breath of wind muffled by towering pines. He slept deeply until a sharp, deliberate tapping shattered the silence. Tap, tap, tap. At first he thought a branch had scraped the window, but the rhythm was too precise, too human. His heartbeat quickened. He lay still, listening. After a moment, curiosity overrode caution, and he slipped from beneath his quilt into worn slippers. The wooden floorboards creaked as he padded toward the window. Lifting the curtain just enough to peer out, he saw only impenetrable darkness and the vague outlines of trees swaying in the wind. No movement, no hint of what had woken him. He frowned, uncertainty prickling his skin. Instinctively, he reached for the handgun he kept on the nightstand, running gloved fingers over its cold metal. With practiced care, he checked the chamber, then slipped the weapon into his waistband. Whatever was out there, he intended to meet it armed. Shadow at the window. Thomas moved silently down the hallway, boots softly thudding against the wooden planks. A second knock, closer now, this time on the living room window. Tap, tap like knuckles seeking entry. He pressed himself against the wall and edged forward, heart hammering in his chest. From the slit of curtained glass, he caught sight of something impossible. A slender figure with smooth, green-tinted skin and long, dark hair that fell in tangled waves around a face both fierce and frightened. Her eyes, black as polished onyx, locked onto his with urgent intensity. She raised one pale hand in a hesitant wave. Thomas's grip tightened on the gun. For a heartbeat, they watched each other in silence, two predators sizing up a mysterious intruder. Then she tapped again, softer, as if begging for mercy. Unexpected visitor. Thomas exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold air. He slid open the window with a muted creak and peered out. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice low and steady. She lowered her hand and glanced over her shoulder as if listening for distant footsteps. "I'm Calithia," she whispered, voice trembling with both fear and determination. "I need sanctuary." At her words, Thomas's mind raced. 1,000 questions sparked. What kind of creature spoke with his tongue? What danger had driven her here? All he saw was a wounded stranger whose flawless skin was marred by faint bruises and a jagged tear in the fabric of a sleek silvery jumpsuit. The cloth was unfamiliar, too advanced for any human design. "Get in," he said at last, yanking the window wider. She slid inside with fluid grace, her movements so quick they seemed unreal. Closing the window behind her, Thomas glanced at the door, his only exit, and heard a sudden rapping against the wood. His pulse hammered. "That," he said, nodding toward the door, "doesn't look friendly." Silent decision. The cabin's single bare bulb cast long shadows across the floor. Thomas stood guard by the front door while Calithia crouched near the hearth, pressing a trembling hand to her side. "They'll come for me," she said, eyes fixated on the bright circle of light that marked the deputy's headlamp through the frosted glass. "They can't know I'm here." Thomas swallowed hard. Deputy Malik had patrolled these roads for years. An unexpected search could mean firearms drawn, questions asked, and a trail leading back to him. Yet the stranger before him, this alien general in exile, carried a secret powerful enough to shatter worlds if it were true. He recalled her trembling admission, "Hide me and I'll give you a secret no human has ever known." He glanced at her, heart pounding, fear warred with compassion. Loyalty to his own made him ready to turn her away, but her desperation, the raw sincerity in her eyes, made him hesitate. Slowly, he eased one hand from his holster and nodded toward a hidden alcove beneath the stairs. "There's a crawlspace there," he murmured. "You can stay until I figure this out." Relief flickered across Calithia's face as she smiled, faint but genuine. Outside, the knocking ceased. The deputy's footsteps faded into the night. Inside, Thomas and Calithia shared a tense, hopeful silence, two strangers bound by a single, dangerous secret. As the cabin door clicked shut, Thomas understood that nothing in his quiet life would ever be the same again. The drone's first sweep. The moment Thomas closed the crawlspace door behind Calithia, the low hum of the hunter drone grew louder, cutting through the night like a steel blade. He pressed his back against the rough wooden wall, hand tightening on the butt of his gun. Above them, the cabin's single window rattled as a faint red glow swept across the glass. Calithia flattened herself beside him, breaths rapid but controlled. "They're scanning for heat signatures," she whispered, voice tense. "If they detect more than one human subject, they'll send in the strike units." Thomas nodded, heart pounding. Every instinct screamed to flee deeper into the woods, but he'd promised to protect her, and she'd promised to share a secret no human knew. Slipping into darkness. They slipped out a side hatch Thomas seldom used, stepping into a tangle of underbrush. The drone's searchlight passed over the hatch, narrowly missing them. Calithia pointed silently toward a narrow game trail that led deeper into the forest. Branches whipped at Thomas's face as he followed her, the undergrowth closing behind them. Footsteps crunched softly on pine needles and dry leaves. Although the night was cold, sweat beaded on his forehead. Each step felt heavier, as if the forest itself resisted their passage. Behind them, the drone's hum faded and then returned, circling wide now, seeking an alternate approach. Fleeting alliance. After a tense half-mile, the trail opened onto a small clearing lit by moonlight. Thomas knelt beside a cluster of boulders, scanning the tree line for movement. Calithia dropped to one knee beside him, pulling a folded map from her jumpsuit. Her fingers trembled as she traced a path toward an old ranger station painted on the document. "We can hide supplies there," she said. "I kept fuel for my transport ship in those storage tanks." Thomas's jaw clenched. He'd never trusted strangers, let alone aliens, but her desperation felt genuine. He nodded once, then rose to his feet. "Lead the way," he said, voice firm. Her relieved smile was brief before she turned and vanished into the shadows. Echoes of pursuit. Thomas followed at a distance, instincts on high alert. The forest was alive with night creatures, owls calling, rodents scurrying, but every sound felt like a warning. Occasionally, the drone's distant hum would pulse through the trees, reminding him how close danger remained. Calithia moved with uncanny grace, ducking under low branches and stepping over gnarled roots. Despite her fragile appearance, she radiated quiet strength. Thomas realized she trusted him enough to guide him through alien terrain and left footprints that would only draw the drone's sensors. He swallowed the guilt and followed, determined to keep his promise. Deputy Malik's return. As they approached the ranger station, Thomas froze at the crack of a twig. Behind them, headlights cut through the trees, the deputy's cruiser. Malik, the same officer who'd searched the cabin. His heavy footsteps and clipped radio chatter grew louder. Panic surged in Thomas's chest. He crouched low and motioned Calithia behind a fallen log. Her eyes met his, wide with alarm. For a moment, they remained motionless. Then Malik's beam swept across the clearing. "I know someone's out here," he called, voice echoing. Thomas bit his lip, mind racing. Any misstep could expose Calithia or end in a violent confrontation. The deputy's radio crackled. "I'm checking the old station next." Risky gamble. There was no time to debate. Thomas grabbed Calithia's arm and pulled her toward the ranger station's battered side door. Malik's voice grew closer. They slipped inside, door creaking, and ducked behind stacked supply crates. The stale air inside reeked of diesel and mildew. Dim emergency lights flickered overhead. Through a grime-smeared window, Thomas watched the deputy's silhouette move past the entrance. Calithia pressed against his side, her body tense. "We can't stay," she whispered. "He'll search inside." Thomas gritted his teeth. He braced against the crates and let out a low groan. Malik paused, head cocked, then moved on. Relief washed over them, but only briefly. Supplies and secrets. While Malik's boots receded into the night, Calithia rummaged through a supply locker. Among flares and canned rations, she found a small canister of glowing liquid and a handheld device marked with alien symbols. "Fuel and coordinates," she explained, handing Thomas the device. He stared at the symbols, lines that seemed to shift in the dim light. "What does this do?" She placed her hand on his wrist, guiding him. "This will open the transport bay doors, then we'll have a chance to escape planetside." Thomas nodded, storing the device in his jacket. Every moment they stayed increased their risk, but Calithia needed more time to decrypt her proof before departure. Through broken windows. As they hurried from the ranger station, the drone's hum returned, closer now, sweeping the clearing. Branches snapped under its weight and the canopy above glowed red. Thomas led Calithia along a hidden service path running parallel to a dried creek bed. Moonlight filtered through broken windows of derelict cabins, casting pale beams onto their path. "We'll follow this to the ridge," he whispered, then dropped to the valley floor. Calithia kept pace, silent except for quiet breaths. The forest floor gave way to rocky outcrops. Each step grew more dangerous, but they pressed on until they reached the top of a sheer embankment overlooking a moonlit valley. Edge of escape. At the cliff's edge, they paused to catch their breath. Below, the valley spread wide and empty, dotted with the skeletal remains of old mining equipment. Distant lights sparkled from the nearby highway, but the drone's searchlight flitted above, scanning the ridge. Calithia pressed against the cold rock, voice low. "Thank you for helping me, Thomas," he exhaled, eyes fixed on the valley. "We haven't made it yet." She laid a hand on his arm and nodded toward a narrow ledge carved into the cliff. "That way to the transport coordinates." He studied her face in the moonlight, fear, gratitude, and resolve washing over her features. Without another word, they edged onto the ledge and began their descent into darkness. Flight under starlight. The path wound down at a treacherous angle, loose stones trickling away underfoot. Calithia moved ahead with agility that belied her wounded state, pausing now and then to help Thomas navigate. At the bottom, the valley opened into a scorched plain of dried mud and old tire tracks. "We're close," Calithia said, scanning the horizon. In the distance beside a collapsed hangar, a faint glow pulsed, the hidden freighter's beacon. A pang of hope lifted Thomas's chest. They sprinted across the plain, leaving footprints that would soon register on the drone's sensors. Behind them, the hum returned louder, closer, threatening to overwhelm. Last stand. Just as they neared the freighter's rusted hull, the hunter drone burst into the clearing with a shriek of metal wings, its red spotlight locked onto them. Thomas reached for his gun, but Calithia grabbed his shoulder, shaking her head. "Go," she hissed, pulling him toward the hangar's entrance. He hesitated. She was his charge, his responsibility. But the drone's targeting sequence began to lock on. With a muttered apology, he followed her inside. Metal doors slid shut behind them, plunging them into near darkness. Dim emergency lights bathed the interior in an eerie blue glow. Calithia pressed a hand against the wall and activated the device from the supply locker. Coordinates flashed on a small screen. Preparing the freighter. In the hushed hangar, the freighter loomed like a sleeping beast. Pilot Aaron, a wiry figure with an oily jumpsuit, emerged from the shadows. "You're late," he muttered, checking gauges on the control panel. Calithia stood tall despite exhaustion. "They're right behind us," she said, voice urgent. Thomas watched as Aaron punched in the coordinates, aligning the ship's inertial drive. Sparks danced across stray cables overhead. Outside, the drone's spotlight raked the hangar doors, seeking an entry. Inside, Calithia placed her hand on a console, initiating startup sequence. The freighter's engines growled to life, shaking loose dust from the rafters. Cliffhanger. As the engines ramped, the drone's siren began on the other side of the doors. Thomas and Calithia exchanged a tense glance. The transport bay lights flickered green, signaling doors opening to the night sky. "Get aboard," Aaron commanded. Calithia hesitated, turning to Thomas. "The proof," she whispered, pressing a crystal into his hand. "Keep it safe. No human must know its contents until we reach orbit." Thomas nodded, heart pounding. Behind them, the drone's wings scraped metal. Aaron hauled Calithia onto the loading ramp. Thomas glanced once at his home forest before sprinting forward. The bay doors began to close. The drone's laser targeting sequence locked on, and then red beams sliced through the darkness. The hidden archive. Laser on the hull. The drone's red beams sliced the darkness, striking the freighter's hull with sharp flashes. Inside, alarms blared and lights pulsed in warning. Thomas pressed himself against the bulkhead as sparks showered from nearby consoles. Pilot Aaron wrestled with the controls, voice tight. "Thrusters are hot, but they'll hold." Calithia knelt by the main viewport, eyes fixed on the flickering glow outside. The drone veered closer, scanning for weakness. Each impact made the metal shudder. Thomas swallowed a rising panic. He'd never flown anything beyond a small plane. Yet here he was, sheltering a fugitive alien general aboard an outlawed freighter. He glanced at Calithia. Despite the flashing red lights, she held herself straight, calm under fire. She locked eyes with him and nodded once. "We're almost clear," she said. Aaron cut power to non-essentials, and the freighter lurched as it climbed into the upper atmosphere. Behind them, the drone's probe retreated, unable to match the ship's sudden altitude shift. Sudden maneuvers. Once above the tree line, Aaron flipped the ship into evasive pattern. The freighter spun, dodging into the planet's exosphere. Through the viewport, wisps of cloud drifted past like smoke. Calithia accessed the navigation panel and entered new coordinates. Her fingers glowed with alien interface polish. She moved faster than any human could. Thomas watched her, awed by the precision. Aaron called out adjustments, his brow furrowed. The freighter rattled as it passed through pockets of debris from old satellites. For a moment, the ship shuddered violently and the drone reappeared in pursuit, its sensors still keyed to Calithia's heat signature. But the freighter veered off, banking into a narrow corridor between stratospheric layers. Within seconds, the drone's silhouette vanished, unable to follow the tight turn. Relief rippled through the cabin. Thomas exhaled a shaky laugh. "I never thought I'd fly with aliens tonight," he muttered. Calithia allowed herself a small smile. "This Isle of Skye," she said, "is ours for now." Escape to orbit. Once clear of pursuit, Aaron engaged the ship's jump thrusters. The freighter's interior lights dimmed as energy diverted to the drive core. The hum deepened into a roar that rattled every bolt. Thomas braced himself as the ship lurched forward, punching through the planet's gravity well. Outside, the blue curve of the world rolled away beneath them. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass, breath catching at the sight of their home planet receding. Calithia stood beside him, hand on his shoulder. "I've made this jump only twice," she said softly. "It never gets old." In the jump tunnel, streaks of starlight blurred into ribbons. Time felt stretched and the cabin's gravity wavered. Thomas clenched his fists, pressing into the floor. When the jump drive disengaged, they dropped into stable orbit around the planet, a silent, empty ring of space their only witness. Plotting a course. In 0G, Calithia tapped coordinates into the main holoscreen. The map flickered, showing dozens of points of interest: mining colonies, research outposts, abandoned stations. She zoomed in on one option, a long-forgotten archive station hidden in an asteroid belt near the planet's outer moon. "This place," she explained, "holds records from my world's secret wars and evidence of their manipulation of human history." Thomas nodded, reading the dots and lines. "Careful," he said. "If they find out we're heading there, they'll send more drones or ships." Calithia's hand hovered over a series of commands. "That's why we rush," she said. Aaron adjusted the freighter's trajectory, routing around known patrol paths. The ship hummed as it prepared for another jump. Thomas listened to the steady beeps of the navigation console, each one a promise of safety, and another step deeper into a cosmic conspiracy. The derelict station. Moments later, the freighter dropped out of jump near the asteroid belt. Through the viewport, jagged rock formations drifted in slow orbit. Nestled among them was the archive station, a ring of rusted modules and brittle solar arrays half sunken in dusty regolith. Its hull was pockmarked by micrometeor strikes and vines of aged wiring trailed like metals across exposed panels. Calithia's eyes narrowed in recognition. They thought they buried it here, she whispered. Thomas stared in awe. The station's single launch bay gaped open like a wound, hinting at looted interiors. Aaron guided the freighter alongside a docking arm, its magnetic clamps still functional despite decades of neglect. Every movement felt tense, one wrong thruster blast and the freighter could tear the station apart. But Aaron's skill was undeniable. With a gentle thud, they latched on and the cabin shuddered into silence. Docking protocols. Inside the adjacent docking corridor, emergency lights flickered to life. The narrow tunnel smelled of stale air and dust. Panels overhead displayed error codes in faded red. Thomas led the way, weapon drawn, while Calithia floated beside him, scanning for automated turrets or surveillance bots. Aaron stayed behind at the freighter's controls, awaiting their signal. "We only have 10 minutes, he said through the comm. "Power reserves are low." Thomas and Calithia advanced past broken airlocks and collapsed storage racks. Each step echoed in the empty station. Occasionally, a dormant drone casing lay half-hidden under debris. The silence pressed on their nerves. Finally, they reached the central hub, a circular chamber with a cracked glass dome. Beneath it, a pedestal held chests of data crystals, but they were locked under an alien security protocol. Calithia's jaw tightened. "Let's open it." Caretaker's shadow. As Calithia worked on the console's alien interface, a movement flickered in the dome's corner. Thomas spun, gun raised, to find a gaunt figure emerging from the shadows. An old man with silver hair and deep lines etched into his face. He wore a patched lab coat stained by years of neglect. His eyes were sharp and wary. "I should have known they'd send someone," he rasped. "Another fleet operative?" Calithia stood, hands raised. "I'm not your enemy," she said. The man studied her closely. "A general," he breathed. "Fugitives always bring trouble." Thomas lowered his gun but remained alert. The man introduced himself as Elias Reno, former archivist and historian who'd refused to bow to Calithia's corrupt government. He had hidden the station's archive from power-hungry factions. "The data you seek," he said, "could topple entire regimes." Thomas exchanged a glance with Calithia. This was the ally they needed. Unlocking the vault. Reno led them through a side corridor toward the vault entrance, a heavy circular door inscribed with both human and alien glyphs. He tapped a code into a panel, but the lock remained inert. "Power cell is depleted," he muttered. Calithia drew the canister of glowing fuel from her pack and inserted it into a recessed port. The door's lights flickered, then glowed turquoise. With a grinding rumble, the vault swung open, revealing shelves of data crystals, holopanels, and bound codices. The air was stale, redolent of old electronics. In the center lay a gleaming data core, Calithia's personal archive of secret dossiers and encrypted transmissions. She approached it reverently. "This is everything," she whispered. Thomas peered around, heart pounding at the thought of what lay hidden here. Hidden truths. Calithia inserted her own data crystal into the core and activated the playback. Holoscreens sprang to life, projecting images of alien officials rewriting human history, orders to erase evidence of alien intervention, files proving experiments conducted on unsuspecting populations. Each image was accompanied by transcripts from covert meetings and planetary decrees. Thomas watched in horror as decades of deceit unfurled before him. Reno stood silently, tears in his eyes. "They claim to protect us," he said, "but they only control us." Calithia's voice trembled. "They must pay for this." Thomas felt bile rise in his throat. The secret no human knew, it was far more than a rumor. It was a conspiracy that spanned worlds. He realized that once this truth spread, nothing, no alliance, no treaty would ever be the same. Unforeseen threat. As the holographic files played on, a distant rumble echoed through the station. Alarms blared, reserve power failing, hull breaches detected. Reno's face went pale. "They've found us," he said. Calithia spun toward the entrance, hands glowing in preparation for battle. Thomas lifted his gun. "We need to leave now." But as they turned, the corridor filled with armed soldiers in alien armor, plasma rifles aimed at the vault. Their leader strode forward, eyes fixed on Calithia. "General Calithia," he intoned, "you're under arrest for treason." Calithia squared her shoulders. "I will not return," she declared. The soldiers raised weapons. In that moment, Thomas gripped Calithia's arm. "We stand together," he vowed. The freighter's alarm sounded through the bulkhead speakers, docking clamps releasing. The station shook as explosions rocked its structure. The hidden archive trembled, and the battle for the truth had only just begun. Dawn's false calm. Pale light crept through cracks in the station's hull as the first rays of dawn filtered past distant asteroids. Inside the cramped docking corridor, alarms still echoed from the earlier attack. Smoke curled from sparking conduits overhead, and the air was thick with the smell of burnt circuits. Calithia stood beside Thomas, their weapons drawn as debris clattered around them. The ancient station trembled, and every echo of shifting metal sounded like a threat. Despite the chaos, there was an eerie calm in those first moments of light, a fleeting quiet before another storm. Neither of them spoke. They simply waited, senses on high alert for whatever might come next. Deputy Malik's arrival. Without warning, a hatch banged open at the end of the corridor. Thomas spun, gun leveled, to see Deputy Malik striding forward. The sheriff's deputy looked tired, his uniform smudged with grime, but his grip on the rifle was steady. "Mr. Carter," he called, voice echoing, "thought I'd find you here." Thomas frowned, lowering his weapon an inch. "This station's off limits, deputy," he said, voice low. Malik's gaze flicked to Calithia, her green skin and dark eyes glinted in the dim light. "I know who she is," he said, nodding toward the alien. "I'm here to help." Confusion and suspicion warred on Thomas's face as he hesitated, uncertain if Malik spoke the truth or played a deeper game. Elia's hidden loyalty. From behind a pile of broken lockers, Elias Reno emerged, hands raised in a gesture of uneasy peace. His hair was streaked with soot, face drawn with exhaustion. "Deputy Malik," he rasped, "I didn't expect you." Malik gave a short nod and stepped forward. "Reno," he acknowledged, "I got your call." Calithia's brow furrowed. "You contacted him?" she demanded, voice sharp. Elias met her gaze with guilt in his eyes. "I trusted Malik," he said. "He said he'd secure passage off this station." Thomas's heart pounded. Reno's tremor was barely visible, but Thomas caught it. Something in the archivist's posture changed, a subtle shift of allegiance that went unnoticed only by someone not looking for betrayal. Ambush in the hatch. With unparalleled speed, Malik holstered his rifle and signaled with a quick wave. In a single motion, two armed officers in human tactical gear stepped through the hatch behind him, weapons trained on Calithia and Thomas. "Hands where we can see them," Malik ordered. Confusion bloomed into anger as Thomas realized too late that he'd been played. "What is this?" Calithia demanded. Malik's face was unreadable. "Orders from above," he said. "You're under arrest, General." The tactical officers advanced, and Thomas had only a moment to decide whether to stand his ground or protect Calithia. In that heartbeat, trust shattered and betrayal bit deep. Calithia's astonishment. Calithia's dark eyes widened in shock as she backed against a bulkhead. Her breathing was measured but fierce. "You lied," she spat at Elias. "You promised safe passage." Reno bowed his head, shame washing over his pale features. "They offered me clemency," he whispered. "My records, my life, they held them as leverage." Calithia's jaw clenched, tears catching in the corners of her eyes. "You traded me for yourself," she accused. Malik's gaze flicked between them, expression emotionless. "We did what we had to," he said. The word "we" weighed heavily in the narrow corridor. To Calithia, it sounded like a lie wrapped in authority. Thomas's choice. Thomas's heart hammered in his chest as he watched Calithia's betrayal. Memories of perilous escapes, silent flights through forests, and moments of fragile trust flickered through his mind. He could feel the data crystal's weight in his jacket pocket, the proof that could topple governments. But now safe haven had turned to trap. Malik's grip on the rifle tightened. "Step away from her," he barked. Thomas's pulse roared. Protecting Calithia meant defying his own kind, risking arrest or worse. But he had given his word. With a sudden, decisive motion, he stepped beside her, raising his gun. "You won't take her," he declared. The corridor fell silent, save for the distant hum of freighter engines and the station's failing systems. Firefight through corridors. Malik's eyes flicked to Thomas's gun, then back to Calithia. "Don't make me shoot," he warned. Thomas hesitated only a moment before firing a stun round that ignited sparks across the corridor wall behind the tactical officer. Shouts erupted. Calithia lunged past Thomas, charging down the tunnel as he provided cover. Officers returned fire, plasma bolts sizzling against metal crates. Thomas and Calithia weaved through corridors, ducking under toppled storage racks and leaping over torn cables. Their boots pounded the floor in a cacophony of desperate flight. Behind them, echoes of pursuit grew louder, drowning out the alarms. The station shook violently as the vault's residual explosions reverberated through the hull. Breach of trust. Amid the chaos, Thomas caught sight of Elias slumped against a shattered panel, tears streaking his soot-covered cheeks. Calithia skidded to a halt beside Thomas, panting, eyes blazing. "How could he?" she whispered, voice raw. Thomas didn't answer. Anger had stolen his words. They pressed on, turning a corner into a control bay. Instrument panels glowed with warning lights. A hatch labeled "Emergency Escape" yawned open. Calithia grabbed Thomas's arm. "This way." He followed, heart heavy, as they sprinted toward the exit. In that moment, they both felt the weight of Reno's betrayal, their fragile alliance shredded by a desperate man's fear. Escape to the freighter. The escape tunnel led them into the freighter's loading bay, where pilot Aaron was waiting beside the ramp. Smoke twisted from engine vents and the ramp lights glowed green. "Hurry," Aaron shouted over the roar. Thomas and Calithia dashed across the bay, stepping over crates and tangled cables. Behind them, alarms blared as the station's bulkheads ruptured. A massive crash rocked the bay, sending dust drifting through the air. Calithia's leap onto the ramp was graceful despite exhaustion. Thomas followed, vault crystal secure. Aaron slammed controls and the ramp slid shut with a pneumatic hiss. Through the viewport, they watched as the station's far wall exploded outward, debris scattering into space. Door seals and heartbreak. With a violent shudder, the freighter tore away from the ruined station. Alarms in the bay stuttered, then fell silent as atmosphere vented into space. Thomas pressed his forehead against the window, watching the rubble drift away like tears. Calithia sank to the floor, head in hands, legs drawn to her chest. "Rano," she whispered, voice hollow. Thomas knelt beside her, offering her space and solace. "We're safe," he said softly. "For now." Calithia's shoulders shook as she inhaled ragged breaths. "He was my only friend," she murmured. "He knew me when I was just a soldier, and he betrayed me." Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the tremor beneath her silvery suit. "Aaron's furious engines." Pilot Aaron's voice crackled through the cabin intercom. "We're clear of debris," he reported. "Where to, General?" Calithia rose, her expression hardening with purpose. Despite betrayal, her resolve burned brighter than ever. "We head to Orbital Relay Delta," she replied. "Broadcast the evidence." Thomas's brow lifted. "You'll expose them now," she nodded. "The galaxy needs to know the truth. The humans on this ship deserve a choice." Aaron adjusted the ship's course, engines roaring as they climbed into the silent ring of satellites above the planet. Through the freighter's viewports, the planet gleamed blue and white, a fragile orb ignorant of the storm brewing in its skis. Reflection in hyperdrives. As the freighter engaged its hyperdrive, stars stretched into silver ribbons beyond the hull. Thomas closed his eyes, letting the gentle vibration soothe his tired bones. Calithia stood before the holoscreen, data crystal in hand, images of deceit ready to broadcast. He watched her silhouette outlined by starlight, courageous despite her heartbreak. Outside, the station's remains drifted in orbit, a testament to elusive truths and deadly betrayals. In that vast expanse, two fugitives carved their own path. Dawn had brought treachery, but as they sailed toward the unknown, they had each other's trust and the power of a hidden archive that could unleash humanity's wrath.